You know what Australia's tourism agencies never openly discuss? There are places across this country where seasoned locals will tell you to fill your fuel tank before you even arrive, because stopping there is something you should avoid at all costs. These are towns where long-haul truck drivers keep going even when the gauge is hovering near empty. Towns where service station staff operate behind security glass, where police response times are counted in hours instead of minutes, and where crime rates are so extreme they have made national headlines. I identified 12 of these locations, and the crime level in the worst of them would be considered a humanitarian emergency in any other developed nation. Before going any further, something essential must be stated clearly. Many of these towns are home to significant indigenous populations. The crime affecting these communities is not a reflection of the people who live there. It is the result of decades of failed government policy, chronic underfunding, intergenerational trauma linked to colonization and the stolen generations, and a lack of real economic opportunity. The residents themselves are often the main victims, trapped in circumstances they never created. This report is about where systems have broken down and what that means for travelers' safety. It is not about blaming communities. The aim is to provide practical information while recognizing the deeper causes that governments and tourism bodies prefer not to confront. At number 12 is Ceduna in South Australia. The town has a population of about 3,500 and sits on the Eyre Highway, roughly 770 kilometers west of Adelaide. It is the last major settlement before crossing the Nullarbor. As a gateway town, Ceduna sees a constant flow of travelers carrying valuables, and when that is combined with entrenched disadvantage in parts of the community and long-standing alcohol-related issues, it creates conditions where visitors can become easy targets. Property crime and theft run higher than the South Australian average, and assault rates, especially those linked to alcohol, also exceed state benchmarks. A grey nomad couple in their 60s who crossed the Nullarbor in 2023 told me their vehicle was broken into while they spent just 20 minutes inside a supermarket. When they returned, their camera equipment was gone. What struck them most was that everyone they met on the other side of the Nullarbor asked the same question. "Did you have any trouble in Ceduna?" That, they said, told them everything. A long-haul driver with 15 years of experience on the Adelaide to Perth run confirmed he avoids stopping there whenever possible, choosing instead to refuel at Port Augusta or Norseman and never staying overnight. The reality, however, is that Ceduna is not dangerous everywhere. Many long-term residents live their lives without incident. The coastline is stunning, and the town serves an important logistical role. The problems are concentrated in specific areas and at particular times. It remains the final major stop before the Nullarbor, where experienced travelers know to secure everything and keep their visit brief. Number 11 is Moree in New South Wales, a town of about 7,500 people located on the Newell Highway, 630 kilometers north of Sydney. It is the heart of a major agricultural region and is well known for its artesian hot springs. What tourism brochures rarely mention is that break and enter offenses have historically been 2 to 3 times higher than the state average, and theft from vehicles is also elevated. The causes include entrenched disadvantage, limited job opportunities, substance abuse issues, and decades of under-resourcing. A motorcyclist traveling through New South Wales in 2022 told me his panniers were searched while he was parked outside a Main Street cafe in broad daylight. Locals were not surprised. One man simply told him, "You have to watch your stuff here." At first, he thought it was a joke, until he saw his bags had been opened. A shop owner who had worked in Moree for 2 decades explained it this way. "It is not a war zone, but you learn the patterns, where not to park, when to be cautious, and which times of day are worse. Travelers," he said, "usually do not know those patterns, which makes them more vulnerable. The trade-off is that the artesian baths really are worth visiting. The agricultural heritage is strong, and many people in established neighborhoods live without serious trouble. Crime, however, is concentrated in specific places and times, making Moree a town where locals know the rules and visitors often learn them the hard way." At number 10 is Port Augusta in South Australia, a town of about 14,000 people that sits at the junction of the Stuart, Eyre, and Barrier highways. It is quite literally the crossroads of Australia, and every outback traveler passes through. That is also part of the problem. The constant flow of transient populations, combined with economic hardship since the power station closed, entrenched disadvantage in some areas, and alcohol-related issues, has pushed property crime and assault rates above the state average. A couple driving from Adelaide to Darwin in 2023 told me they were approached aggressively by intoxicated individuals while refueling. Nothing was stolen, but they were badly shaken and said it was the most uncomfortable they had ever felt at a service station anywhere in Australia. On their return trip, they drove straight through to Woomera instead. An interstate truck driver with 20 years of experience said Port Augusta is not the worst place on his route, but it is far from ideal. Drivers learn which service stations to use, which parks to choose, and which times to avoid, and new drivers are briefed before their first run-through. The trade-off is that established caravan parks have security, the Wadlata Outback Center is genuinely interesting, and the problems are not spread across the entire town. It remains a vital crossroads where experienced travelers know exactly where to go and where not to linger. Bourke in New South Wales follows next, with a population of about 2,500. Located on the Mitchell Highway, 800 kilometers northwest of Sydney, it gave Australia the phrase, back of Bourke, meaning beyond civilization, a description that has become uncomfortably accurate. Break-and-enter and theft rates have long been among the highest per capita in the state, and assault levels are well above average. The causes include extreme socioeconomic disadvantage, multi-generational trauma, geographic isolation, limited services, and decades of failed policy. A retired couple traveling through in 2022 experienced an attempted break-in at a rest stop just outside town. They later said they had been warned by people they met in Dubbo, but assumed it was exaggerated. It was not. They drove all the way to Coonamble the next day without stopping. A former business owner who left Bourke in 2020 after 15 years said he loved the town and the good people in it, but crime eventually drove them out. After 3 break-ins in 2 years and constant shoplifting, his wife was threatened in their store, and they decided to sell and leave. There are signs of hope, including justice reinvestment programs and community-led solutions, and the Bacco Bourke Exhibition Center is worth visiting if vehicles are secured. Long-term residents have adapted, and many people are working hard for change. Mount Isa in Queensland comes in at number 8. With a population of around 18,000, it sits on the Barkly Highway more than 1,800 kilometers northwest of Brisbane. It is a major mining city, and its boom-and-bust economy creates instability. Property crime, including unlawful entry and theft, runs well above the Queensland average. Assault rates are higher than normal, and domestic violence is a serious concern. The isolation that brings wealth from mineral resources also creates major challenges for law enforcement and social services. A backpacker passing through in 2023 had their rental car broken into at their accommodation and personal items stolen. Hostel staff were not surprised and told them it happens all the time, even providing a list of precautions. A mining worker who has lived there for 8 years said the problems are real, but there is also a strong community if you know where to look. Crime, he said, is not everywhere all the time. You learn the patterns. The trade-off is that major caravan parks are generally safe during the day. Underground mine tours offer authentic outback experiences, and many families and long-term residents live normally with basic precautions. And this is where things begin to escalate. Katherine in the Northern Territory, with a population of about 6,500, sits on the Stewart Highway 320 kilometers south of Darwin and serves as the gateway to the spectacular Nitmaluk National Park. Here, the contrast between natural beauty and social breakdown is stark. Property crime sits well above the Northern Territory average, already the highest in the country, while assault rates are several times the national figure. Alcohol-related violence continues despite measures such as the banned drinker register. As a service center for a vast region of highly disadvantaged remote communities, Katherine draws in people seeking help, which concentrates problems already driven by limited opportunity, intergenerational trauma, and under-resourced services. A family driving from Darwin to Adelaide in 2023 told me they were confronted by an intoxicated group at a service station with verbal threats made. They left without refueling, driving on empty until they found a safer roadhouse. They had planned to stay overnight, but instead kept going until 10 o'clock at night to get further south. A road train driver with 12 years on the Darwin to Adelaide run said everyone who drives through Katherine regularly has a story. His own routine is to time stops carefully, use a specific service station, and never leave the cab at night. The trade-off is that Nitmiluk Gorge and the hot springs are extraordinary, tourism does function, and many families and workers live there successfully. Crime, however, is concentrated in certain areas and times. The advice from experienced travelers is consistent. Fuel during the day, use secure caravan parks, avoid the town center after dark, and consider staying at Mataranka or driving on to Darwin instead. Kununurra in Western Australia has a population of around 5,500 and lies on the Great Northern Highway in the eastern Kimberley, more than 3,000 kilometers north of Perth. It is the gateway to the Bungle Bungles, Lake Argyle, and some of the most breathtaking landscapes in the country. It is also a place where experienced travelers know to take serious precautions. Property crime rates are among the highest in Western Australia. Break-ins and theft are common, and assault rates run several times the state average. Domestic violence is also a major concern. Kununurra functions as a service hub for remote Kimberley communities facing extreme disadvantage. Combined with alcohol availability, multi-generational hardship, and vast distances limiting service capacity, problems persist despite repeated interventions. Tourism brings people carrying valuables, increasing the risk. Retirees on a Kimberley trip in 2023 had their caravan broken into at a rest area outside town, with camping gear and tools stolen. They said everyone they met warned them not to free camp near Kununurra, advice they ignored and paid for. Police took a report but offered little hope. A tourism operator who has lived there for a decade said they love the place and its working community, but they now warn visitors directly to lock everything, avoid walking alone at night, and use secure parks. The landscapes are generally safe. Lake Argyle Caravan Park has better security, and the Ord River and Bungle Bungles are spectacular. It is the town, not the surroundings, that demands caution. At number 5 is Wilcannia in New South Wales. With a population of about 750, it sits on the Barrier Highway 960 kilometers west of Sydney along the Darling River. This is where traveler warnings become almost universal. Break-and-enter and theft rates are among the highest per capita in the state, and assault rates are extremely elevated. These figures reflect deep social and economic collapse. Wilcannia was once a thriving river port of more than 3,000 people. Today, it is one of the most disadvantaged communities in Australia. The COVID outbreak in 2021 exposed severe overcrowding and lack of services that residents had endured for decades. A driver crossing the Barrier Highway in 2022 stopped briefly because of a mechanical noise and was immediately confronted by people demanding money. He fixed the issue with shaking hands and drove straight to Broken Hill. A former teacher who left after 3 years said the children were wonderful, but the systemic failure was overwhelming. When her car was stolen and burned, she gave up. This is not a story about inconvenience for travelers. It is about a community in crisis that needs real investment in housing, health, education, and jobs. Until that happens, the practical advice remains to fuel in Broken Hill or Cobar, about 200 kilometers away, and if stopping is unavoidable, stay with your vehicle and remain alert. Fitzroy Crossing in Western Australia has about 1,300 residents and sits on the Great Northern Highway between Broome and Halls Creek. It carries one of the most heartbreaking distinctions in the country. The community itself begged for alcohol prohibition because violence had become so extreme. Assault and domestic violence rates are among the highest in Australia. In both 2007 and 2022, local women led campaigns calling for alcohol restrictions because they were being killed. That level of desperation speaks volumes. Property crime exists, but violent crime is what stands out. The causes include multi-generational trauma, remoteness, service hub pressures, and decades of government neglect. A couple traveling from Broome to Kununurra in 2023 witnessed a violent incident at the roadhouse and drove on. They had been warned to fuel in Broome or Halls Creek and not rely on Fitzroy Crossing. Deaky Gorge is safer than the town and is worth visiting, but the advice remains clear: do not linger, never stay overnight, and push on for accommodation. The courage of local women fighting for safety shows the strength of the community, even as it continues to suffer from deep trauma. At number 3 is Halls Creek in Western Australia, home to about 1,500 people on the Great Northern Highway between Broome and Kununurra. It is the place where every experienced Kimberley traveler learns to calculate exactly how far their fuel will take them. Property crime is among the highest in the state, and assault rates have been estimated at 10 to 20 times the national average. It is one of the most disadvantaged postcodes in Australia. A grey nomad couple in 2022 said their vehicle was surrounded while refueling and money was demanded. They left without filling up and said it was the only place in 15 years of travel where they genuinely feared for their safety in daylight. A road train driver with 18 years experience said he has driven further than he should have just to avoid stopping there. The advice is unanimous. Daylight only, stay with the vehicle, lock everything, never stay overnight, and use Warmun Roadhouse instead. The residents who live there are victims of systemic failure, not the cause of it. Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory has a population of about 3,000 and sits on the Stewart Highway between Alice Springs and Darwin. There is no alternative route, and every driver knows to be cautious. Property crime runs many times higher than the already elevated NT average, and assault rates are among the worst in the country. The town has made national headlines for child abuse and extreme violence, and has even been the subject of Royal Commission scrutiny. In 2023, a family returned to their car after 10 minutes inside a service station to find marks around the locks from an attempted break-in. The attendant behind the security glass was not surprised. A road train driver of 20 years said Tennant Creek is where drivers earn their pay, with strict rules, daylight only, never leave the cab, refuel, and go. Businesses operate behind heavy security, some with bulletproof glass. The advice is to fuel at Tea Tree or Elliott if possible, and if stopping is unavoidable, do so quickly and in daylight. At number 1 is Alice Springs in the Northern Territory, a regional city of about 26,000 people in the heart of the Red Center, 1,500 kilometers from the nearest capital. This is not a small outpost, yet its crime levels rival those of humanitarian emergencies. Break-ins run 5 to 10 times the national average, and assault rates are roughly 8 to 10 times higher. Youth crime, car theft, and violence have reached crisis levels. In 2023, Woolworths temporarily closed a store due to crime, an extraordinary step in Australia, while youth curfews and emergency federal funding were introduced. This is not rumor. It is a documented national crisis. A retired couple traveling through the Red Center in 2023 experienced just how severe the situation in Alice Springs has become. While staying at a caravan park, their van was broken into, and there was also an attempt to steal their vehicle. During that same visit, they witnessed a violent assault on the street. They told me they had spent a decade traveling across Australia and had never encountered anything like what they saw in Alice Springs. They stayed 3 nights. Their caravan was targeted on the second night, and on the third morning they watched someone being attacked. That was enough. They abandoned the remainder of their Red Center journey and drove straight to Cobra PDE. In another incident in 2024, a family visiting Uluru had their rental car broken into while they were eating dinner at a restaurant. Every piece of their luggage was stolen. When police were notified, officers said a report would be filed, but made it clear this kind of crime happens constantly and recovery should not be expected. When people in Uluru heard what had happened, their reaction suggested stopping in Alice Springs was an obvious mistake. Next time, they said, they would fly directly to Ayers Rock Airport instead. A former teacher who left Alice Springs after 8 years described a deep personal loss. They loved the town, the landscape, the community, and especially the children they taught. But crime eventually forced them out. Their home was broken into 3 times. Their car was stolen. Colleagues were assaulted. And when their wife was threatened in a Kohl's car park, they made the decision to sell their house, even at a financial loss, simply to escape. A retail business owner who spent 15 years operating in Alice Springs said they have poured more than $50,000 into security in just 3 years. That includes bars, cameras, and roller shutters. Staff have been threatened. The owner has been robbed. The shop now closes at 4 p.m. because evenings are no longer safe for employees. And the question remains unavoidable. How is this a town in Australia in 2024? It is important to be clear about what Alice Springs represents. It stands as the most visible failure of Indigenous policy in the country. Decades of disadvantage, unresolved trauma, and failed interventions have converged in a regional city. Aboriginal residents trapped in poverty and people trying to live ordinary lives are the primary victims. Travelers become secondary casualties. This is not a place filled with bad people. It is a place where systems have collapsed and everyone pays the price. What would actually make a difference is sustained, long-term investment in housing, health, education, economic opportunity, and trauma recovery, not just more policing and curfews. Real solutions must be community-led and properly funded. Until that happens, the practical advice is clear. If you can, fly directly into Ayers Rock Airport when visiting Uluru. If you must stay in Alice Springs, choose secure accommodation only. Never leave valuables visible in a vehicle. Avoid walking at night. Limit the time you spend outside your lodging. This is the capital of Australia's Red Centre, where a crime emergency so severe it shut down a Woolworths store and triggered federal intervention has made "Don't stop in Alice" the most common advice among outback travelers. So that brings us to the full picture. These are 12 Australian towns where the warnings shared among truck drivers, grey nomads, and seasoned travelers are backed by official crime data that tourism boards prefer not to highlight. From Ceduna at number 12, where seasoned Nullarbor crossers know to lock everything, through the Kimberley Circuit where Kununurra, Fitzroy Crossing, and Halls Creek demand serious caution, to Tennant Creek and Alice Springs, where crime has reached national attention and forced federal action. And let me be absolutely clear about what this report is and what it is not. This is not a condemnation of communities. These are places where government neglect, policy failure, underfunding, colonization, and intergenerational trauma have created conditions of severe social breakdown. The people who live in these towns are often the greatest victims. Many are trapped by poverty and a lack of options, enduring crime they never caused. The answer is not simply avoiding these towns. It is demanding that governments finally address the disadvantage and trauma that created these realities. The people who live there deserve far better. But until real change happens, travelers deserve accurate, honest information so they can make informed choices. Most towns across Australia are safe, welcoming, and vibrant. These 12 are exceptions where the crime numbers tell a different story, even when tourism authorities remain silent. Being informed is not fear-mongering. It is basic common sense. If you stayed with me to the end, subscribe for more reporting that shares what industries and tourism boards often leave out. And I would genuinely like to know, which of these towns surprised you? Have you experienced anything like this yourself? Share your story and like this video so more people planning outback trips see what they need to know.